Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to another episode of Decoding the Polls, a series of discussions, webinars, and podcasts hosted by Center for Public Policy Research around election seasons. I am Sri Lakshmi, your host for the day. The recent UK election has been a game changer with the Conservative Party suffering a major defeat. The Labour Party, led by Keir Starmer, secured the largest mandate since Tony Blair, ending a 14-year, four-term Conservative rule that saw five prime ministers, from David Cameron to Rishi Sunak. But what does this decisive victory mean for the future of the UK, and especially how will it impact the relationship between UK and India? So joining us today are D. Dhanuraj, Chairman CPPR, and Professor Bhaswati Sarkar. Professor Sarkar is a Jean Monnet Chair and Professor at the Center for European Studies, School of International Studies, JNU. Her research focuses especially on political and social developments in Europe, particularly concerning nationalism, democracy, immigration, integration, European integration, and identity. She is currently concentrating on Central and Eastern Europe, the Nordics, and the Baltics. In this expert discussion, we will discuss the historic victory of Sir Keir Starmer's Labour parties in the 2024 UK elections, the shortcoming of Rishi Sunak's Conservative government, and the prospects of a resurgence of the Conservative Party in the medium term. We will also explore the new administration's potential impact on UK foreign policy, especially its relationship between US, China, and India. And furthermore, it will also address the government's approach to navigating the current economic crisis, including Brexit and the contentious issue of migration. So join us as we analyze these critical topics and what they mean for the UK's future. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sri Lakshmi, and welcome Professor Bhaswati Sarkar to this interesting and engaging discussion on UK elections. And you're an expert, so I mean, I don't want to give any intro to the elections. And of course, this election, as far as I understand, has got greater significance and implications in the global order. We will come to that later as we proceed with the discussion. But to start with, I was wondering, on June 4th, Indian election results came out, and there was something unexpected happened that afternoon. In terms of the majority that many of the poll pundits expected for BJP in India, they fell short of 29 seats, and then they have to form a coalition government. In UK, in contrary, the expectations was that Labour Party is going to win these elections. And Labour Party's victory was on the expected line. But were you surprised hearing the number? Because once the election results were totally out, they had won 412 out of 650 seats, which is the highest after Tony Blair's victory in 1997. And probably this is also one of the remarkable victories of Labour Party in the last 200 years in the UK history. So Labour Party 5 years back, they were they received the most worst defeat under the leadership of Corbyn. And then in 2022, they elected Keir Starmer as the leader. And Conservatives at the same time, they have, actually the order got reversed. 2019, it was the worst year for Labour Party, and 2024 is the worst year for Conservative Party. And we've seen a few prime ministers during this time. But after 14 years, Labour Party came with a bang, winning 412 seats. But at the same time, they were able to possess only 32 or 33% of vote share in UK. So how do you analyze these election results? Was it a surprise to you in terms of number of seats? Especially when Labour had lost miserably in 2019. and they came back with a bang, and then, of course, under a new leadership. We'll come to the, I'm sure the reasons or probably what all helped Labour Party to win elections as we proceed. But I'm curious to know whether you are surprised or not.
Uh, Good morning, everyone. Thank you, CPPR, for organizing this discussion. And thank you, Dr. Dhanush. I think you have laid it out quite beautifully in terms of what has happened on in this July in UK. I think 2024 as as a year is very critical and also very exciting in terms of elections. It's not just UK has had elections or India has had elections. It's also, we have seen the European Parliament elections, which were actually, as Europe observers, we were looking at it very, with great anticipation as to what is going to happen, especially given the kind of projections which were there in terms of the right-wing political parties performing extremely well in the domestic scenarios, able to connect with some of the important issues that were in the minds of voters. So European Parliament elections, India's election, UK elections, which were there to be held sometime this year, but it was kind of preponed to an extent or in July. Then you had, as a result of the European Parliament elections, again, a domino effect in France, which also had its parliament election. So it has been a year of elections in a sense, which has been exciting. And so far as your question as to what kind of, the kind of performance that has come out so far as the UK elections are concerned, and the kind of, numbers which we see, 412 seats for Labour, and the Tory party actually has done worse in its existence since 1832, which it has been reduced only to 52 seats. And as you correctly said, that from 2019, when we look at when Labour lost out to 2024, it is a kind of a remarkable shift. Now, in some ways, what was going to happen, unlike, for instance, as you correctly said, in terms of the elections in India and the projections, in terms of UK elections, it was quite evident that, the Conservatives would be out. But yes, how? And they were, shifted out in the elections is something which perhaps was not anticipated. As I said, that it's not just that the popular mood was against the Conservatives, which many of the pre-poll surveys were showing, but it was also, in a sense, kind of there was a kind of show of what is going to come in terms of the other elections which were happening, which means, as I would like to here point out, the European, in the council elections which were there, which means the local elections which were there in 2024, where again you see that the Labour Party was actually winning, and the Labour Party had won 1,158 seats in the council elections of 2024. The Liberal Democrats had also increased their number of seats. The Greens had increased their number of seats. The Independents and others had increased their number of seats. The only party which had not increased and had actually gone down was the Conservatives. In the local elections, they had 515 seats, minus, which was, it goes negative in terms of they lost 474 seats. So which means, as we can see, that these local elections were a kind of an indicator as to what was the mood. Then there were also by-elections which were held in 2023 and 2024. And in all of these by-elections, most of the seats actually went to Labour, and it shifted from the Conservatives to the Labour. So in a sense, yes, what happened on July 4th was something which was perhaps anticipated, but exact numbers number in terms of 412 seats or this kind of majority, perhaps not. Because you see the kind of losses that they had, not just in terms of seats, but in terms of people who lost out. Liz Truss, a former prime minister, she lost her seat. This was the first time that something like this had happened. 8 cabinet ministers, they lost their seats, including the defense secretary, the culture secretary, and the leader of the House of Commons. So yes, of course, some commentators at that point said this was actually a bloodbath. So this perhaps what was not anticipated, but definitely a clear shift in terms of a clear majority, not a struggling majority, but a clear majority for Labour. That was something perhaps which was, I would say, anticipated.
One of the reasons when I was going through the literature, and I was also actually looking at the poll predictions even before elections. So one of the things that most of the poll predictors observed or highlighted as UK was embracing election mode was that there is a total opposition to conservative politics. And in fact, I think we should also discuss what are the other parties actually who gained in this election. Nigel Farage, eighth time he is making his entry into parliament. And social, in fact, Liberal Democrats have increased their seat share to around 72. And there is an analysis post-election that both Labour and Liberals, they had an understanding. I don't know whether it was a tactical understanding, but at the same time, wherever Labour Party was weak, they asked their voters to vote for Liberals, and wherever Liberals were weak, Labour Party was voting for Liberals. So, in a sense, the mood of the nation was totally against conservatives. And in addition to that, my reading, as far as my reading and observation goes, the Labour politics also changed the last 2 years. Jeremy Corbyn, when he was opposition party leader, he took some extreme position in many of the policies. And when leadership, he was more open. And I also understand that some of the policy positions taken even before the polls. I mean, during the campaign, it was more liberal in nature. This is not something that probably one has expected from Labour Party. But given the situation, their economic policies are more liberal. They are not against even signing an FTA with India. They're actually encouraging it. So what are those reasons that, as far as your analysis goes, what are the reasons that led to a major thumping victory for Labour Party in UK?
I think when we are looking at this, victory, there are two things which come to my mind. One is what you have pointed out, that people were basically quite fed up with what the Conservatives had to offer, right? So that was one part. In terms of Conservatives themselves dug themselves into a hole, in a sense, right? The other is what the Labour Party did in terms of the changes it did to itself and reforms it did within, and how the way it projected this change in a way which kind of clicked with the answers which people look in terms of governance. Now, if I'll just elaborate a little on this. If you look at the last few years since Brexit, right? I think this is something which the Conservatives did in terms of they pushed it through. They had the referendum which they had promised, and then they followed up on that referendum, right? So, but the way it was followed, the whole, moving away from the European Union, it was a very, very, tedious process. The government itself could not kind of get its own deal passed through or supported by its own party, right? So that politics was out there for everybody to see. So if you see that how Brexit kind of impacted the Conservatives, I would say that was very critical, because it started with Cameron. okay, as I said, that the referendum was promised and done. And then they were it would obviously have immediate impact on the economy, which they've struggled to kind of, limit that impact. And then you had Theresa May, who was trying to persuade her parliamentary party to pass the European deal, and which we have seen repeatedly was being rejected. Then we had Boris Johnson, who got the deal, right? But by then again, COVID had come in, right? And COVID had its own kind of limitations, which was imposed on all governments in terms of its impact. It also had limitations in terms of what the restrictions, the COVID restrictions, which were there for everybody to follow. And here again, you see that what actually happened was that though Boris Johnson was possible to kind of wrap up the Brexit deal, in the case of COVID, his party and he himself got embroiled in the Partygate scandal. So you had restrictions for people which they had to follow in terms of staying inside, in terms of social distancing, whereas it was evident that this was not being followed by the government. So there was a sense of the loss of integrity, right? So you are not performing well economically. There are no answers. There people are having issues in terms of what they face in their everyday lives. Then you have government putting restrictions which they themselves don't follow, and therefore that is a loss of integrity. Then this followed by Liz Truss coming in, and then when Liz Truss comes in, then again the economic management that you see was so pathetic that it discredited the government completely. And then finally Sunak comes in and he puts in some kind of policies which are there to get the economy going. But the other problem which he, I think, was facing was, and which was one of the very important issues so far as the Conservatives are concerned, is the question of immigration. So there are a host of issues that we can see which they were basically grappling with, but unable to kind of deliver. So Brexit, the fallout of Brexit, the fallout of COVID in terms of loss of integrity of the government, and then you have the other two, prime ministers coming in who were also struggling with various issues. One, again, you see the Ukraine war and the impact of that war on finances, on resources, on energy bills. So all of this kind of come together, and you feel the public or the citizens feel that the government is actually not in a position to deliver what it is supposed to deliver. Not only that, it's also internally so kind of divided. You have this repeated changes in the highest level with different prime ministers coming in, so which means also you can see the internal divisions within the party. So that, I think, is something which was critical in kind of people moving away from the Conservatives and looking towards Labour. Now, if you look at the kind of problems which were there in everyday kind of lives of people, because it's based on that people switch in such a manner that we have seen. If you look at these problems, you see there were problems with housing, there were problems with, there's some reports which say that UK has the highest proportion of housing which was built before 1946 compared to the other EU countries. So there were problems with housing. People were living in very low quality or poor quality housing. Then you had between 2021 and 2022, 350,000 children who were pulled into relative poverty. So this is something which again counts in terms of affecting people. And what, as we see, what the other interesting thing which I came across was there is this charitable trust called Trussell Trust, which basically looks at helping out people who are in distress. And this Trussell Trust has put out its numbers. It has food banks, and between April 2023 and March 2024, it distributed 3.1 million emergency food parcels to people who were facing hardship. And this of this 1.1 million were to children. So what I'm basically trying to say is, here you have that there's a government out there which is trying to do stuff, but at the level of actual people facing problems, you see that problems are mounting in terms of questions of survival, sheer survival. It's not even quality of life. You are just basically talking about survival. Then the other problem which is there was with the NHS, and that is something which has again become very, very huge in terms of the waiting lines which you see, and this actually also got heightened as a result of Brexit, because that meant that many NHS workers, around I believe around 10,000 workers, had to immediately leave. So these people, the staff leaving, also had an impact on NHS apart from other things. And then of course there was COVID. So NHS not working, housing poor. You also, you may recall that there were so many strikes which were there in the UK in the past, years. In 2023, the nurses were on strike, junior doctors were on strike, teachers were on strike, all asking for pay hike, and pay hike because the cost of living was going up. So therefore, you see that there were these problems which were there at the ground level in terms of what people were facing were enormous. And to this is the second aspect of when you say that how labor actually reformed itself, and what the answer that they had to all of these problems which were which people were facing. And this is something which they put out in their manifesto, which is actually called Change. So this change, what they talk of, is basically that is a change where they're talking about restoring hope, of bringing the people out of this chaos which has been kind of inflicted on them by the Conservative Party. They're talking of politics as service, and this is something which we also heard when Keir Starmer actually gave his speech when he came in, that politics is something as service. Is not something which you do because of your own self, but it is to serve people. So as service. And what basically they were very pointedly had in their manifesto were 5 priorities. And that's, I think, very important. And that's kind of, I think, also clicked because of the problems which I just talked of. And the first thing which they were talking of is that they would deliver economic stability. They would have tough spending rules. And that's something which they were talking of in terms of taxes, in terms of inflation, mortgage. These were to be kept as low as possible. In terms of NHS, which I just talked of, the waiting times with 40,000 more appointments would be cut short. So that's something very clear that this is what we are going to do so far as the NHS is concerned. They were also talking of launching Border Security Command to kind of deal with criminal boat gangs. They were talking about establishing a great British energy publicly owned company for clean power. So there were a number of things which they were talking of in terms of clear indications of what they would do. They would hire teachers so that there is no shortfall. So these are the kind of clear indications that they were giving, that they had a very clear plan as to what they would be doing if they would be elected. And I think these things combined, the combination of the problems which had kind of piled up in terms of the government being unable to actually make any effective change in the lives of people, and the answers in terms of what the Labour was saying that they would offer was something which kind of clicked. Yes, of course, there was a very clear shift in terms of how the party was looking at itself internally after the 2019 defeat. There was a change in leadership, as we know. Jeremy Corbyn was out and Keir Starmer was in. And of course, the party at that time was actually, there are a number of issues which were there so far under Corbyn's leadership. But again, interestingly, Corbyn has won as an independent and is very much there in the parliament.
So taking a cue from what you said about the leadership styles, one of my observations is that this time around, all the conservative leaders, they come from Eton, they come from, very elite schools, studied in Oxford, whereas somebody like, Stammer, he is not having the elite background. Actually, something that he was trying to sell throughout his campaign was his middle class background. that I understand the workers' plight. My mother was, somebody worked with NHS, so I understand what is NHS. And my father was a factory worker. I understand the difficulties and challenges the workers are facing. Whereas, somebody like Rishi Sunak, I think he
Yes.
was, if I'm not wrong, he's the the richest leader in the democratic world. Something around 900 million US dollars is to his credit. That I believe that made a big impact among the voters. And second, conservatives also becoming very radical in nature in some cases, because they become very ultra rightist. And I don't know whether they were also competing the way the Trump is trying to do in US. And now post-election, there is a rumor that Nigel Farage could join Conservative Party. I'm not so sure, but there are some reports that Nigel Farage could be their future leader. He could be inducted. So how do you see the revival of Conservative Party? I mean, the Conservative Party is part of British politics for decades and century, but how you see but in British elections, I realized that nothing is impossible, because we see the worst of Labour Party. Now they're coming back with thumping majority. So conservatives could also learn from what really worked out for Labour. But now the report says that they are also trying to bring some ultra conservative figures. Do you think that's a way conservatives should revive their prospects?
Uh, that's very interesting, Dhanurji. You know, uh, when we talk about political parties, you can't kind of write them off. And we have seen them not only in UK, everywhere, even in India. Look at the elections today, the last elections that we have had. Look at TDP. So I think writing off political parties is something which would it's very dangerous. So we cannot write off, right? We cannot write off the conservatives. Of course, they will learn from their mistakes. They will see what actually clicks with the people, and therefore there will be some internal thinking on that. So far as the question of Nigel Farage is concerned, Nigel Farage is a very interesting figure, and Nigel Farage, very interestingly, also when he won the elections, actually, because he's won the election, I mean, the number of seats that he has won is just 4, but the vote percentage is quite high. And therefore, there was this, he said that this is because of the first past the post system, which actually kind of, disadvantages the smaller parties, and we would also kind of should think in terms of changing perhaps to a system which allows for smaller parties to actually get their due. And there he was talking in terms of perhaps looking at proportional representation. So Nigel Farage is of course very radical, and if you see his speeches when he was part of the European Parliament, right? He has been talking of taking back control of borders, taking back control of UK borders since I think he was in the European Parliament for so many years, and he has been constantly looking at that, and has been a very, very strong Eurosceptic and a critique. So now that he is in the UK Parliament after so many tries, of course, there is something which he will be doing in terms of strengthening his position. But to think that Nigel Farage would automatically be, kind of inducted within the Conservative Party and also become the leader, I think that is something which I'm not sure it is going to happen, because of course there will be other figures who are already there, very much part of the Conservative Party, and also there would be people who are not comfortable with Farage. So within the Conservative Party also there are shades, right? So a quick switch from one to the other, I think that's not something which I would see is going to happen. Nigel Farage will definitely be an important player for as of now. There will be also other elections in between, and we'll have to see how his party fares in those, and what kind, because this is just one election, right? So it's an indication, but it is also an election which comes after, you see, 14 years of the Conservatives in being in power, and all of these things which I just talked of in terms of, these very, very important, in a sense, issues surrounding Brexit, surrounding COVID, surrounding the Ukraine war, surrounding now also the war in Gaza. So these are things which have happened during their tenure, right? So so there had to be reactions to all of this, and sometimes it's not. It of course is not easy to have the best answer, and therefore you see that the kind of problems that they have faced is quite different, right? So, and I think the divisions within the party is also very clear when we look at the intra-party competition in terms of leadership. So if you look at Boris Johnson's coming into how he came in, if you see how Liz Truss came in, and then how Sunak came in, all of that actually shows, the how the politics within the party works. So I don't think that Nigel Farage is going to be immediately in the Conservative Party. I think he will, because I mean, he is a person who would like to be a leader, and I don't think he can immediately become a leader of the Conservative Party. I don't think that's something which at least I don't
Okay.
anticipate in the near future.
Yeah, no, this is something that I've been following some stories developing from UK. So I was actually trying to echo that with you because there are some reports I was closely following that Nigel Farage could be inducted, but there is also opposition. And Preeti Patel, in fact, another lady of Indian origin, she has already declared her candidature to the leadership
Yes,
role. And in fact,
absolutely.
I'm always amazed by the way the smooth, unlike many other democracies, one party leader becomes prime minister. When he loses that election, she loses the election, and then they step out and they, in fact, take retirement from active politics. As far as I understand, Boris Johnson was there to help in election campaign. I think this was a request from Rishi Sunak to help him out in the last round of elections. I don't think that helped him a lot. But otherwise, Indian democracy, in fact, if you see, even if you lose or win, leaders will be always around and they will continue. But whereas in the mother of democracy always shows that very interesting, because I think they believe that, the people lost trust in our leadership. So we have to give way to the new leadership, right? So I'm sure Conservative Party will figure out, the way to revive their
Just,
fortunes in the coming years.
just as Labour figured it out, right? You see, you just
Right,
contrasted
exactly.
2019 and 22. So you cannot write off political parties, and these parties have been
Right.
there for so long. So this is just something which has happened, 14 years. And as I said, that these three things or four things that you see actually kind of one after the other, right? You coming out of Brexit, you have COVID. You come out of COVID, you have the war. So so therefore, all of this kind of come together in a way in creating the situation that is there, and also of course the internal.
So now, I would like to hear from you how this government's foreign policy is going to be different. Is it going to be different in its substance and its approach, or are they going to follow the typical UK line? I mean, because world is changing, is no more as unipolar world, is a multipolar world. And as far as UK is concerned, in the last many years, because of Brexit and various other reasons, UK is not considered as a very strong power in international discourse. But now there's an opportunity for them to restructure, revisit their foreign policy, and also being an economy of, I think among the European countries, UK is still having 7% growth. So we can't ignore economic power of UK. So how these developments are going to change or influence new government's foreign policy?
You see, when you're saying that UK is a strong economic, continues to be a strong economic power. In fact, there were some people who were within the Conservative Party who were surprised when Sunak called for the elections, because they said it's just that the recession is something which is under control and we are doing well now, and we should actually stretch it to the last before calling the elections, so that people actually feel that there is some change. So they were quite surprised that he called the election when he did. But yes, of course, it is doing well economically. But if you see, it has actually slipped in position, and we have gotten to the 5th position, and it has come to the 6th, right? So it's not really progressed, but it is holding. It's one of the important economies. If you're looking at the foreign policy, or what kind of changes one would possibly think of, the indications are, from whatever I have gathered from various interviews that I have seen of the current Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. He's quite clear in terms of that there are certain things which are kind of bipartisan. So if you will not see major shifts, right, in terms of, or very, very, in terms of the foreign policy turns. For instance, if you're looking at the transatlantic partnership, if you're looking at US-UK, this is a special relationship. And both the, Labour Party's manifesto, and also David Lammy himself has been very clear that this is a special relationship which is going to stay as it is. It does not matter, and he's very clear on that. It does not matter who is there in 10 Downing Street or who is there in the White House. So it is irrespective of whoever occupies the White House or 10 Downing Street. This is a relationship which is there to stay and will continue. So therefore you will not see that with the coming of the Labour Party, or with the change, as we will whatever change or not a change. In some sense, there will be change, right, in terms of who comes to power in post-US elections. So the idea is that is something which is steady, right? So there is no shift in that. In fact, what David Lammy talks of is, for instance, the Five Eye intelligence, which they have with, UK and US being two countries which are there. That's something which is very important for them. He talks of AUKUS, and AUKUS has happened earlier, right? And he says that this is something which is very important, and we give great importance to this. He talks about how the UK government is looking at the Indo-Pacific, and how it is trying to kind of balance its I would say apprehensions about China by looking at other players in the Indo-Pacific, and this is again something which will continue. So in that sense, if you're looking at foreign policy, you see the major trends or the major foundations of that policy, I think, are going to, of course, continue. The very interesting term that Lammy talks of, or Lammy has articulated, is progressive realism. I'm sure you have heard of that. And he's talking about progressive realism in terms of that this is something which is also digging back to what the Labour had offered earlier in terms of the other leaderships which were there, other foreign secretaries who were there. And he talks of realism, which made UK part of the NATO. And so that, again, NATO is something which is very important, and that is going to be important for them. And at the same time, that using this realism to promote progressive ideas, and that's what he's basically trying to articulate. And in that, they're talking about basically keep their focus on human rights, for instance, keep their focus on climate. And that's something which I think will be different in a sense, because what the Labour Party, both in its manifesto and David Lammy himself has been articulating, is that Labour, under the Conservative government, on questions of climate leadership, UK has actually moved away. So the Labour Party would like to bring UK back into the question of climate and climate leadership. So that's going to be a very important part of their agenda. So in that sense, there will be some changes, but in terms of the players with which they engage, so far as the US is concerned, so far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, going to be the same. However, there's a however in terms of how the Conservatives, because they did the Brexit, how the Conservatives looked at EU and Europe, and how the Labour is going to look at it. And the Labour manifesto and both the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister is very clear that they're keen to have a close relationship with Europe, very clearly mentioning that Europe is an ally. Europe is not an adversary. Europe is an ally, and therefore they need to kind of look at Europe as such, and therefore have closer ties with Europe. So this is something which again will be different in terms of how they were dealing, how the previous government was dealing. So there is a clear sense that Europe is very important, and the Labour government is going to give a lot of importance and will spend a lot of its energy on revitalizing its ties with Europe and the European Union.
So even though, UK always align with US policies, or they are like thick friends in foreign relations. But what do you think about, I mean, I'm sure there's a certainty in, I mean, kind of certainty in US that Trump will come back to White House. And you already mentioned that whoever be there in the 10 Downing Street or in White House, UK-US relation will continue without much substantial change in their, outlook. But even then, I was going through one of the announcements of UK Foreign Office other day, and they announced, they're putting up their efforts to have free trade agreements, more economic relations with certain regions. So that includes India, Gulf countries, GCC, 6 countries in GCC, Turkey, South Korea. But while I was going through the list, I didn't see US in that list. And is it a realistic? You talked about progressive realism. Is a progressive, realistic approach to rest of the world by the UK, the present UK government, that US need not be the in the pole position all the time to understand the global economy. There are many other regions, many other countries actually coming forward, and we would like to have engagements. I think since UK economy is not in a very good shape, they would like to revive and improve their economic growth. They are reaching out to many other countries, South Korea, Turkey. I was really surprised to see Turkey in that list. Gulf countries, of course, I think the major change, the global change in the last few years is that all the Gulf countries are coming out of the oil economy. They are becoming very dominant economic powers, not only not only in the economic front, but I think also in the geopolitical side for various reasons. So UK is trying to redefine the policy, redefine their foreign relations, even though they are keeping US as their strong ally on their front.
Look, when I said that we are going to keep US as a strong ally, it doesn't mean that everything is going to go, matching every step, right? It will, every country has its own core interest. But what I am basically trying to articulate is that in that core interest, US is going to be an important player. Now, how much of that alignment will they be drawn into, for instance, if you're looking at in the next few years, if US and China have, much more adversarial relationship, will UK be drawn into it? That's a question which needs to be then looked at. Like, is it going? Are you going to match it step by step? But if you're looking at in terms of it, UK reaching out to other areas and other countries and opening up in terms of having FTAs. Now, again, if you're looking at it in terms of the FTA negotiations is something which has been started by the previous conservative government, right? So we also need to understand that, for instance, with countries like India, before Brexit, what was the relationship was actually at 2 levels. One was through the European Union prism, right? So what European Union was doing, the other was bilateral. And so if you look at what the FTA with the European Union, which has again been there with India for a very long time, right? And so UK was again part of that. And then once it is post-Brexit, it's an independent player. And as an independent player, then it's also looking at which are the countries which would possibly be beneficial to kind of have economic agreements with. And in that, India would, of course, come up. It has come up very strongly. And this is something, again, is in a sense a continuity, because if you look at the Labour manifesto, it looks at other regions and it specifically talks of India, that they're interested in looking at India. Looking at India also, I think, matches with the otherwise kind, this whole idea of democracies coming together, because that's okay, something which is very much in the agenda of the Labour Party, right? It has certain way of looking at the world. So in fact, if you see the previous problems with the Labour Party and India was specifically on questions of how they interpreted democracy and how they interpreted the question of Kashmir. So if you look at the previous, leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, right? He was very clear about Kashmir and its need for self-determination, and it the need to give it a voice. In 2019, in September 2019, there was a motion which was passed in the Labour Party, which was basically saying that Kashmir should be given its right to self-determination, and that India and Pakistan, there should be some mediation so that between these two countries. So this is something which was completely different from what the Indian government stand is, or what the British government stand was, right? So they were not in power, but this was what they were articulating. So there are these sticking points which were there. So when you see the new government coming in place, on one hand, you see that there is a continuity in terms of what the Conservative government had started in terms of its focus on India, in terms of pushing for a FTA, but you also see that there is a change before the elections itself. When Starmer changes the party, he's also looking at prospective, right, regions and countries with which Labour, if in government, with align. And so he realizes that India has economic heft. Of course, there is no reason why you could ignore it, right? But it also, I think, in a sense, the whole G20 summit of 2023 also shows a diplomatic heft, because you got the African Union in, you could manage to put out a consensus document. So India cannot be ignored if you want to look at other actors with whom you want to align, or with whom you want to kind of pursue your relation. And this also fits into the Indo-Pacific area and trying to balance. So therefore, if you're looking at how, specifically if we are looking at India and UK relation in this, we see that there is something which is interesting, which is happening in terms of carrying forward what had been started. And very interestingly, David Lemmy was here a few days back, right? And he says that FTA is the floor, it's not the ceiling. So there are much more things that we need, more things to come. And they have already signed, they've launched a memorandum, right?
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yes.
Because David Lammy says that it's a floor, not the ceiling. There are not many more things we can expect. But at the same time, one of the domestic policy issue in domestic politics, UK is actually facing the issue of migration. And as far as we understand the Indo-UK FTA talks are concerned, after 14th round, the issue that really copped up was our, human resource, the workforce migration related to that. And UK is actually trying to curb the migration. And in the campaign, in fact, the Labour leadership was silent about it. I don't think they were so forthcoming about what they are planning to do. I've not seen any statement. Whenever the Stammer was asked about this question, he said, I understand the issue. We will look into it in detail. So what do you expect? The FTA talks between India, UK is also going to reflect what is UK's domestic politics.
I think, of course, migration and mobility is a huge point, and it's immigration in a sense is a sticking point, right? So far as not just UK, any of the European countries are concerned. They are there. You can see the anxieties around migration, around immigration. But at the same time, there is also a realization that these countries, because of their aging demographics, need people. Right. But we need to understand that every country will have core interest in terms of who they want in. That's exactly what the, taking back control of borders means, that you will be deciding who will come in and who will come out. Now, if you did think in terms of migration and mobility, that has been a sticking point. It has been a sticking point, not just the UK and UK-India FTA, but also the European Union-India FTA. That's also a problem area. But you also see that migration and mobility agreements are being signed between governments to basically keep the legal channel, the regular channel open. In the case of UK, also we have a migration and mobility agreement now, which was but again in the previous government, right? Which basically now allows 3,000 young professionals to go into UK every year. It is basically mutual, but I'm looking at it from our point of view. So basically, you see that is a component which has been, in a sense, addressed. The problem again is of irregular immigrants, and that's a sticking point. And how many people are there? How many people are overstayed? Our numbers do not match with their numbers, so that is a sticking point which is there. Now, so far as the question of this migration and mobility and the Labour government is concerned, I think it's again, in a sense, there are certain things which have been put actually this year itself, beginning of this year, by the previous government, in terms of skilled labor movement, in terms of trying to regulate the numbers. So you see that there was one kind of policy which was or a mechanism which was put in place, by which it was said that students cannot bring in their dependents, right? So that is one way which it was done. Then caregivers, they cannot bring in their families. Then the number of the threshold income for you to get people that again has been increased. So there are a number of things which the previous government has already done. I don't think they will be doing away with it. What the UK Labour government will do, and what it had actually had in mind, was that they will need to look at to reduce the numbers. They're also on the same page of reducing numbers, right? So they are basically saying that we are going to reduce numbers by looking at the overall skill shortage. We will try to fill that from within the country. How will you do that? By upskilling. So there are certain things which they want to do, that so that you have internally people who are there who can be actually doing those work, and not overtly interested in increasing the numbers. So if you want that there would be an increased number, and FTA is going to be based on that, that's something which is which again will be a sticking point and continue to be a sticking point. The other thing which was also a problem, I think, was about the contribution which Indian workers make, and that being transferred here. So that is again another point on which there are some issues, and which have to be worked out. But essentially, if you look at the question of migration and mobility, I think the across party platforms, the idea is that it has to be controlled. They are all kind of grappling with it as to how to do it. Nobody has the best answer, and nobody has a clear answer. But yes, they would all like to reduce the numbers, and they would like only regular immigrants to come in, depending on what is the requirement. Internally, so far as the labor is concerned, as I said, that it has clearly said that it is going to look at what is the shortage, how to fill that shortage, how to do upskilling. But these things take time. You can't upskill over a period overnight, right? So in the interim period, there will be some kind of requirement which they would still have. I think one thing which I would also like to point out, when I said, and I thought maybe we would discuss more on that, but in terms of when they're looking at Europe, right, and they're trying to kind of rebuild the relationship, they're basically looking at trying to have the trade and cooperation agreement which was signed by Boris Johnson is up for review in 2025, next year, 2025 or 26. So one of the things which Starmer is also trying to do there is to have greater mobility. Because that's something which is not there right now, because now it's the third country, right? So they want to have greater mobility, which was there earlier. So perhaps you will see greater mobility from European Union to UK East. That's something which could possibly be there. But yes, there is no clear answer. All of the parties would ideally want to reduce the numbers as much as possible, or to have only people who serve their core interest in terms of keeping the economy afloat. Awesome.
A couple of questions more before we conclude the discussion. One is about, I mean, taking a cue from what you answered now about, European Union relationship, UK's relationship with European Union. Keir Starmer, in his earlier avatar, in fact, was somebody who actually crossed up to the, he raised this issue again and again in the public fora before he became the leader of Labour Party, that he is looking for a second referendum. Now he is not more talking about it. He completely changed his stand positioning on that. But what do you think about Labour parties, Labour government's approach to Brexit now? I mean, I see even some of the senior Labour Party leaders are actually talking about mutual recognition on various fronts. And what are your expectations on that front?
So as you correctly said that earlier there was the second referendum thing which was there, but they realized that this is not going to work. So now the manifesto and also the government is very clear. I mean, before the elections itself, because it had to first get to power, right? So they were very clear that this is not, even if they come to power, second referendum is something which is out of question. No return back to the single market, but at the same time, better coordination with European Union. And as I just said, that in that they are basically looking at the agreement, this trade and cooperation agreement which was signed, which is up for review. They want to, what Keir Starmer said in 2023 in one of his interviews, that this is a very thin agreement. We need to kind of flesh it out. We need to have better connections, and this kind of, mobility that I just talked of, or, recognition, mutual recognition of professional degrees, for instance, or easy movement of artists and musicians, easy movement of youngsters from European Union to UK. This is something which they're trying to do. But the other thing which they're also trying to do is to rework the veterinary agreement, which basically is an agreement which is there. They want to put that agreement in place, because after the Brexit, there are now many restrictions on the movement of agro food articles or agro food products from the UK to European Union. So there are many checks, many certifications which are needed, and they are trying. What Keir Starmer would like to do is to have a new agreement in place, which will actually remove the requirement for these kind of checks, for these kind of certifications. Now, so far as the European Union is concerned, from what I understand, from what I read, is that it is pretty happy with whatever has been put, the deal which is there, right? So when it is up for review, it is basically, the European Union is basically looking at tweaking, minor tweaks here and there. It is not really looking at shifting from a thin to a thick kind of an agreement. The Labour government and Keir Starmer is basically interested in having supplementary agreements to make all of these things which he's talking of, and the greater cooperation possible. Now, whether the European Union would be actually up for it is something which one is not very sure, because that there is a kind of a fatigue with Brexit and the Brexit dealing, like they're not really interested. There are other things and other issues which concern them. And also there is a kind of lack of trust in terms of all that went into how Brexit happened, and therefore to rebuild that trust. Also, they may not be sure that even if there is some fleshing out of the agreement, if there is a change of government, whether that will hold or not. So that's something. Plus the kind of things which Starmer has in mind, these take a very long time to actually put in place. It's like this kind of reworking is painstaking. It takes a lot of hard work, time and energy. Plus, when you're dealing with European Union, you're also balancing all the member states' interests. So it's time taking, whether they have that kind of time, whether European Union has that kind of energy, whether it is really interested, because so far as it is concerned, this agreement works. So therefore, the Labour government may want to do certain things, and it has put it out there. But whether it will actually be able to, get European Union to actually seriously think of it is something which needs to be seen. We do not know.
What about the approach to China? What do you expect? Any change in the relationship?
Again, I think there with regard to China, if you look at the previous government, it was basically because, as I said, in a sense, there is a bipartisan kind of an understanding on some of the foundational things so far as the foreign policy is concerned. So if you just look at previously what was happening in terms of how the previous government was looking at China, one was the concern about security. So national security and looking at it, the concern of national security, that's something which was out there. The other thing is that they were basically looking at it. There was this, the way they were looking at China was basically as a systemic competitor. So there is this thing about a different kind of a system which always plays out very clearly in how they look at China. And when the new government has come in place, there are some who would argue and who are arguing that, they need to, the way UK has been dealing with China, it needs to kind of relook at it in terms of also having a good working relation. So right now that relation is not there. It is more around, the noise is more around the question of how there are different systems, how human rights is an issue. So that's more on focus rather than what the economy or business deals could be. So the idea is perhaps that there is a need to balance, and some are looking at, and some commentators are actually looking at what different European Union member states have been able to do so far as China is concerned. So if you look at France, if you look at Germany, you see European Union is talking of de-risking, decoupling, all of those are there, right? Talks about it as competitor, as it talks of it in terms of cooperation, but also in fact much more strong word in terms of systemic rival. But in spite of being a systemic rival, they're still able to do business, right? So you have France, you have Macron who goes to China, who visits China, and he's speaking in a completely different language from what von der Leyen is talking of, right? And he's saying that, yes, we need to look at, at the prospects. We don't need to align. He's talking of strategic autonomy. We don't need to align with US completely. So if US has something with, Taiwan and China going, we need not really follow that line. So you can see that there's this business aspect, economic aspect, and what they can do. Similarly, in the case of Germany, you see Scholz, he has done 2 visits. He visited this year also. So clearly that there's a way in which they're kind of looking at China. Now, so far as this new government is concerned, it's again basically going to look at it to the question of what are the economic prospects which are there. But at the same time, the basic thing about questions of security and human rights, those are also going to play in. In fact, in the ASEAN foreign ministers meet, David Lemmy did meet with his Chinese counterpart, and they're basically what the Labour government is saying is that they need to have better understanding of what China is. So they want to build their China capabilities. This the previous government was also talking of, that we need to better understand what it is so as to be able to deal with it. Of course, you will not be able to ignore. So you'll have to deal with China, and if they have core interests, so do we. And how do we work around those core interests is something which they're basically grappling with. But of course, this is again a new government, so a fresh set of eyes. But I don't think that going when they look at China and the economic prospects, the security prospect, the security questions that are going to completely disappear, which was there in the earlier government. That's also going to be very much there playing in the background, or maybe as important.
So it has been a very wonderful discussion of UK politics and how new government is going to revisit some of their policies and how some status quo will be maintained. But I have one final question before I let you leave. That's about what is the message that left parties and social democrats are receiving from this particular election victory of Labour in UK. And because, for the last many months or few years, we see the ultra conservative or rightist parties are, even including European Union elections, this is a victory of Labour Party. Do you think this is giving a message to political parties across the world? And my understanding is that again, dissecting the Labour campaign, they didn't go by the very conservative left Marxist ideology this time. And they didn't, I don't think they got into the cultural wars or identity politics during the campaign. But still, they were very progressive. That's what I think, many are discussing about the progressive, realistic approach of Labour Party. So what is the message that they are sending out to rest of the world?
I think, when you're looking at their victory and when you're looking at how they approached their, the electorate when they were basically seeking those votes, they basically kept themselves to issues which were troubling the electorate, right? So those issues were of inflation, those issues were of rising costs and rising energy bills. So that issues of healthcare, etc. Now, if you're looking at some of the kind of issues that they had earlier in terms of, say, under Jeremy Corbyn, those are not there reflected here, right? So there is a change which has happened in terms of what the party has understood is going to, work so far as electoral politics is concerned. I understand when you say that, the Labour has won here. If you look at, for instance, also right across UK to France, again, you see in the parliamentary elections, the left has won in a sense, right? The left unity, the group that
many say that France elections happened after UK election, so this was a kind of follow up to the UK.
No,
Do you?
No, I still don't think it's a follow-up to the UK. I think when you're looking at the election in France and how it has, kind of got the left together and what they want, what they managed to do, is also basically that they were able to kind of get the message across that what Marine Le Pen's coming would mean so far as French politics and French understanding of itself as what France stands for is concerned. But you also realize that this could only be done, right? Not just coming together, but the kind of understanding which the mainstream party, right, which Macron's party, and they reached that, this was more evident in a sense in France in terms of you allow the strong candidates to be there and the weak candidates withdraw. This was clearly done, right? Because they realized that this is not going to work otherwise. Wherever there was a three-cornered contest, it was converted to a two-cornered contest. So there were certain very real, very clear, permutation combinations which were being done. It was not as an easy flow of giving people a choice and, you do what, there's an election. There are political calculations which are being done by the political parties, given the signals which are out there. So for me, when I look at the rise of or the victory of the Labour Party, but I also look at Nigel Farage, right? So you need to also understand that is very much out there. So if the Conservatives have failed to deliver, there is one Nigel Farage who is emerging. And if the Labour also which has come on so many promises, so all the problems which were there and all the reforms which it said that it is going to do and get the country out of the conservative chaos, if it falters, right, there could be a shift to a much more conservative right, because the people will say, okay, this is not working, so this is something which why not give? Because if it's about giving chance, you give a chance to another party. So I think Nigel Farage is something for me is very interesting to actually keep my eyes on, in terms of what is doing and what actually, because there's a substantive number of votes there. If you look at the Labour victory, right, you also, and I think this is something which you mentioned initially, it's not a very, the voter turnout is low. The number of, if you look at the vote percentage which they
32
actually got,
percentage. 32
yes,
percentage.
which is not a huge percentage. The number of seats and that doesn't match, right? So they're 412, but actually percentage wise they're not that strong. So
So that also raised debates on FETP. I mean, first post the past system,
yes,
because they
yes,
say, like, we should change the system now.
that is what Faraj was saying, that we should
Right.
change the system, because this is not the correct reflection of what actually people want. So therefore, when we talking about the labor is right now with 412 seats, but it needs to work very quickly towards getting its the agenda right, actually delivering. What it is able to deliver will be very, very important, because as I said, the number and percentage is not that high or that convincing, one would say. Even in if I recall correctly, the number of votes, actually in 2019 they had more number of votes, 10 lakh something, and it is now 9 lakh. So you also see that what they have actually polled is less. Plus, you also see that in Keir Starmer's own constituency, the margin with which he has won is less than what with which he had won earlier. So there are these, things which need to be taken on count. So there is a macro picture which is emerging in terms of how they have performed. But if you look at it much more carefully, you see that it is not that that earth shattering as it seems when you look at the numbers in the parliament. And therefore they have to, as I said, deliver. They have a huge task ahead if they have to keep this mandate, and because it's not very long before you will have the next elections. It looks very long now, right? But you're actually counting backwards. The moment you're elected, you're counting backwards, right? You're moving towards another. So therefore, it's all about how they're able to deliver, at least because some of these things which they have promised will take time. But there has to be something short term which eases, right? Which looks like that it is on track of delivering. So that's something which we need to keep in mind.
Thank you so much, ma'am. This has been a very, very, engaging and insightful discussion. I think you brought out many aspects of UK elections, and also how Labour Party's victory could influence geopolitics in the region. And I strongly believe there is nothing permanent in politics, whether in India or in Europe, or in UK or in US. Things can change, and voters are the voters decide what kind of government they would like to see, what kind of changes they want, and they also convey this message to political parties. If they are not happy, they will definitely make sure that the party in power is defeated or not. So thank you so much for your time.
Just one point can I add before you thank
Sure,
me?
sure.
Just one point, because we are talking of political parties. Because I just wanted to bring in one, when we are talking about democracy and voters being able to, kind of express their voice, their choice. I think it's important when we are looking at European states per se, to look at the rise of the right-wing populist parties, because that's something which is very much there in state after state. They are now in, governance, they are in coalition. But apart from that, I think what is also very important is that they have been able to push some of their agendas onto this political discourse, and the kind of noise that you see around immigration. This was not there before. Now all the mainstream political parties have also picked up on this, because you see that this is something which is very, very important so far as question of getting elected, and the electorate's anxiety around questions of the us, them, other, these binaries, which they have managed to kind of bring to the fore of the discussion. I think this is something which one needs to really keep a look at, because there has been this influence. So you may say that, left is one, left is doing this, or social democratic parties are doing better. In a sense, they are also doing better in the Nordic countries, right? So there were problems at the rise of the right, and then there is some kind of a pushback. But by picking up on those agendas, by picking up on some of the questions which they have raised, so that is something I think which one needs to keep in mind when we are looking at how the politics is being developing in Europe and across Europe.
Sure.
Sorry,
Definitely.
thank you. Otherwise I'll go.
Definitely. That's a great ending to this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm looking forward to have more and more conversations with you on these subjects in future as well. Thank you so much. Over to you, Sri Lakshmi.
Thank you, ma'am. So as we wrap up today's discussion, we have explored the seismic shift in UK's politics marked by the Labour Party's sweeping victory, ending a long era of conservative governance. Our esteemed guest, Professor Bhaswati Sarkar, has provided insightful analysis of the potential implications of this change, from domestic policies to the international relations, especially concerning India. We have also delved into the new government's challenges, including Brexit and migration, and the prospects of the Conservative Party's future. So thank you for joining us in this episode of Decoding the Polls. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more engaging discussions on the evolving global political landscape. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.